Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Grace Otis, and this is a special bonus episode of the Global Mom Show. I told you last time that we were talking with Anjelica Malone, and we're just going to keep talking and finish our conversation today. So you guys are going to get to hop in on that and hear what we're talking about. We finished up our last conversation talking a little bit about just materialism in the U.S. and how we feel that when we're in a different culture, it's sometimes easier for us to be ourselves. And we kind of want to continue talking about that a little more. And we also want to talk a little bit about just what it means to kind of understand who you are as a global citizen of the world, or as a third culture kid or a third culture adult, and how you develop that in your own home and in your own life. So, Anjelica, welcome to the show again.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's dive right back in. We were chatting about the whole idea of feeling that there's certain standards that you have to keep up with when you live in America, if you're American, or when you live in your home country, whatever home country that might be. So how do you, now that you are in the situation where you're back in the military base and you're around a lot of women that have these expectations and standards that you feel like you should be meeting, how do you ground yourself and remind yourself, I want to live in a way that manifests my values and passes those on to my kids and doesn't try to fit into a cookie cutter perception of everything around me. So what do you do to stay grounded in that?
Yeah. So the first thing for me was just recognizing that. And I don't think until maybe early on listening to your podcast that I even realized that I was affected by my third culture upbringing. I'm not sure when I heard the term third culture kid, but when I did hear that term, I knew that was me. And I realized that that was why I had always felt all the different things I felt, especially when I was in the U.S., like the few times I finally lived in the United States, and the times that I did interact with, say, Black women whose context for life was very much within the American culture. Those kind of differences I felt, and I didn't always understand why. When I heard the term third culture kid, I realized why that was. It was nothing with them, and it wasn't anything wrong with me. It was that we just had different contexts of life. And so the first thing I think is definitely realizing that about yourself. And you may need to go back and, think about your upbringing. Maybe you didn't live your whole life outside your parents' culture or your home culture, but maybe your formative years, maybe your first time, in school or something like that was in this third culture space. And once you realize it and you kind of see where it happened and what that is that's affecting you, it's easier to digest if you don't think there's anything wrong with you and you don't think there's anything wrong with anyone else. And then the second thing is realizing that it's okay to be different, that you don't have to be like everyone else, and that it may even be easier to explain to other people when you meet a friend and they ask you about things. Like, one of the hardest things for me is when people mention a song or a TV show or something like that from when I was growing up. I don't know most of those things. My husband, he knows like every song that existed throughout the 90s. And I probably could name a handful because they were not what I listened to. On top of my parents being very conservative and not allowing us to really listen to secular music, we were not attached to the American culture at all. I didn't have cable television. I didn't have a television that connected me to the American TV. I didn't listen to the radio that played American music. I mainly listened to music that my parents had purchased, and that was even very limited. It wasn't like I was listening to a whole lot of different music for the most part. And so when people ask me like, oh, don't you know this popular TV show, or don't you know this popular celebrity, or this song, I don't. And I used to think like, am I a lesser of a certain type of person? Am I lesser of an American, a lesser of a Black woman because I don't know these things? And I realized no, because my upbringing and my past looks very different than theirs. So it's easier, I think, once you realize that you are different, maybe why that is. And then when you make friends, explaining that to them, that, your context is a little bit different. And so it's developed, different ideas in your head, and it's made you relate to different things. And I think that plays a big part in just how I live out my life too, and raise my kids, is that I've seen all these different ways of living that have affected me and have determined how I want to do things.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, like the term that was really helpful for me, because I felt like for a long time that I couldn't claim like third culture anything, like third culture kid or third culture adult, because I didn't live overseas when I was growing up. And yet for most of my 20s, I lived back and forth from being abroad and in the US. And every time I came back to the US, I had terrible re-entry shock, like depression and anxiety and just tears, lots of tears. Mm-hmm. And it was every time. And even if I had only been gone for like a couple months and then I came back to the States, or a year and then I came back to the States, it was just like this feeling of swirling around and not knowing where I belonged and not feeling like anyone understood and feeling like I was kind of going crazy a little bit. And also kind of the same thing, because you've missed out on a whole, whether it's 3 months, 2 months, 2 years, 5 years, you've missed out on all this American culture that everyone else has. And so, I did what I did over in India or Germany, is I tried to assimilate. So I tried to take, to fit back in. And that's kind of the whole idea of being a triangle, is that you go from this country of circles to the country of squares, and you come back to the country of circles, and you just try your hardest to turn into a circle again. And you can't, so you just become a triangle. And that whole concept really helped me to visualize what was going on in myself, because for even the past 8 years since I've been back from India, or actually it's been longer than that now, all this time I've just been trying to just assimilate back in to this community, and realizing that I was letting go of some of my passions and some of my real interests as a global person and as a global mom. And so just realizing, I think the sooner you realize it, the better. Like, I think at the beginning for me, it was really raw. And I would be curious to see, how you handle this when you come back to the States. There's a lot more resources about reentry now. And I know like Small Planet Studios just had a reentry relaunch retreat that they talked with a bunch of people about how to really make your reentry a time where you're looking at what you learned and how you want to live that out. And I think if I had had something like that, my whole transition process would have been a lot better, because it's only now that really I'm like, I want to claim this global identity and I want to make it a real part of my life, instead of just letting it be a background, because I think I felt like I had lost it. That now that I was living back in the States and I was just in this like quote unquote like normal kind of lifestyle, that I wasn't global anymore, and I had to let that go. Like I couldn't be the global mom or whatever, because I was just in American culture. And so realizing that I actually have the capability to create this life for myself and for my family that centers around global issues and global ideas, and that I can do that by bringing in resources, maps, friendships, online resources, books, music, all of those things. But I have to make it a priority. And I was talking with Mia Wengen in the episode a couple weeks ago for Multicultural Children's Book Day about how, if you want to find diverse books, you have to look for them. You can't just expect that they're just going to be there. And if you want to have multiculturalism in your life, it has to be a value to you, and you have to make it a priority, because the wave of culture around you is otherwise just going to sweep you up. And I think that once you realize that, though, it can be really empowering, because you can take those aspects of your global identity and the things that you really enjoyed about living overseas, whether it's the flexibility or stepping out of your own culture or feeling like you don't have to meet up with the standards or norms of where you are. And you can kind of claim those and say, you know what, I'm not going to assimilate. I'm going to be a triangle, and I am going to claim that. And I'm going to be a third culture kid, and I'm going to claim that. And it's okay. I don't have to fit in completely. And that there are other people that feel the same way. Because I think when you're isolated, you're in a new community, you just feel like, well, nobody really understands how I feel about this. And I just feel like an outsider. So I don't know. I mean, that's just a lot of random thoughts about that, but you can give your viewpoint.
No, that makes sense
On that.
I think that I will have to make more of an intentional effort when we move back to the States because we're living here and there's not just the Chamorro culture. There's Japanese, there's Chinese, there's Korean, there's Filipino, there's the American culture just kind of around us without any intention. It hasn't been too hard. There are events. They just had what's called Festival of the Pacific Arts, FestPac, that happened this past year. And we went and saw all these cultural dances from all the islands around here, Papua New Guinea, and just many, 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 many. Mm-hmm. It hasn't been something that I have to put forth as much effort unless I'm trying to teach them about my daughters about other cultures outside of Micronesia and, the Marianas. So I do think it will be more intentional in the States, and I'm not sure how that will be. I think I might even have to focus on first is helping them to recognize that they may be different, that they may have different ideas. Like it was funny, my youngest girl the other day asked me if she could have Poke. She's like, Poke. And I think to her, Poke is very normal. You can get Poke anywhere. And when we go back to the States, that may not be the case. So I think the first thing, just teaching her that like we're in a different environment now. Mm-hmm. We used to live on Guam, and on Guam, there were these things like you can get rice everywhere. That might sound funny, but literally like everywhere you go, you get rice with your food. And so they are very used to eating rice. And so things that are their normal, I'm going to have to teach them that, that doesn't happen here, that it's a little different here. So I think for us, that might actually be the first thing is just introducing them to this new way of being, this new way of life. And, then putting back an emphasis on engaging with different cultures again.
And how often do you guys get to go back to the States right now?
We have not been back since we've been here. So we've been here almost 3 years and we have not gone back to the States. It's really expensive to get back to the States. And we thought, it would be best to spend our money on traveling here on this side of the world. We didn't know if we were going to be moving back to the East Coast or the West Coast. And if we moved back to the East Coast or to Puerto Rico, we knew it would be almost impossible to travel on this side of the world again. So anytime we get a chance to travel, it's been over here on this side of the world.
So where have you traveled?
The girls have been to Japan and Bali, and we'll be in Australia soon.
Cool.
And then I've also been to Korea. I did like a day in Korea. So I've been to those same places, Japan, Bali, Korea. And we actually did a really fun trip with a friend of ours who has 2 little boys who are just about the same age as my girls when we went to Japan. Our husbands were both working. And so we just did like mom and kiddo trip for 1 week to Japan, just took trains and did Airbnb. I love Airbnb. And so I'm praying it all works out when we go to Australia. But we just did that. And so that's where they've been so far.
Okay. Well, this is not something I was planning on sharing, but I did want to we were just talking about this, so I thought I would share. One of my favorite books of kind of the last couple years that I've read is The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. So this book is about the Hmong people, and it's kind of gives an entire history of their culture. The journalism on it is incredible. The research, the background on the whole community, and the problems in Laos where they were living and having to come to the States as refugees. And it follows this one particular family, and their daughter comes to the States and ends up having an epileptic condition. She has severe epilepsy and has all these cultural conflicts with her doctors, and there's just challenges in understanding. There's no translators. And actually, I've heard that some of the top medical schools in the U.S. use this book as like a required reading because it helps to understand the challenges with different cultures that people have in the medical community in the States. So there's a couple things that really intrigued me about this book. One is just the writing is really incredible, and it really showcases the challenges of the refugee community not being able to assimilate into American society because of a lot of the stereotypes and preconceived ideas about them is a lot of it. And that's something that we're dealing with now in the refugee ban, and all of that is these misunderstandings about different cultures and feeling like people aren't assimilating because they don't want to become American or something, and they just want to stay in their own place. And also, I think there is a security in staying with your own group, but also sometimes there's a lack of welcome from the American society that really says, we want you to be a part of us. And so let's get to know you, and let's get to know your culture, and let's get to know more about you. And that's what was happening in this medical institution, is there was a lack of understanding of their cultural values to even teach the parent how to give the medicine or what to do in different situations, because they had different spiritual values and understandings of where epilepsy came from and what it was and all of that. So that book is really interesting from that perspective. And then for me personally, it was a really great, interesting book that I happened to be reading when my middle son started having some seizures. And so I had read like all this explanation about different types of seizures and different kinds. And the book is fantastic at explaining so many different things. Anyway, I couldn't finish the book because in the end, I mean, the girl actually passes away. And I knew that, and I was like, I can't read this right now while my son is going through this, but because it was just a little bit too close to home. But, the book really helped me to understand the whole medical community and the epilepsy issues. And we wound up getting great care and getting a wonderful specialist and neurologist and getting, medicine that he needs and that's helping him. And so he's doing really well now. And it's not at all the type of seizures that she had. So it in that way, I'm really thankful. But this book was just so deeply moving to me because of all the history that the refugees had been through in first coming to the States. And I think that's one of the things that really has affected me with the whole recent refugee ban, is that the refugees that are coming here have been through atrocities. They've been through war. They've been bombed. Their babies have been killed. I mean, this story had one baby where they would drug the babies with opium to keep them quiet while they were traveling through the jungles, and they gave a baby too much and the baby died. They saw all their friends get shot and killed, and then they wind up in the US and they're trying to make a life of it. And that's what people who are refugees have been through, whether they're from Somalia or Burma or Syria or wherever. Those are the issues that they're facing. And that's why it's really difficult to understand, because there's so many people suffering around the world. There's another podcast that I listen to called Sorta Awesome, and they had a really great episode this past week that talked about kind of the facts and figures behind refugees in this country and what the security risks are and aren't, and the vetting process right now as it exists. It's very difficult to even be accepted as a refugee, much less to be accepted as one in the U.S. And all of that. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there just to let people know that I am thinking about it. And just because we're not talking about it on this show doesn't mean that it's not something that is kind of a part of my psyche and my thought process as I'm going through the days. So, but Anjelica, I don't know if you had anything to say about that.
Yeah, no, I will say something about it really quick. I volunteered with a refugee organization in Buffalo, New York for a while, and that was my first real experience with refugees. Well, second experience. I dealt with refugees in the military a little bit while doing work, counter-drug operation type work. They weren't involved in drugs, but you do run across migrants during that work. And so that was probably one of my first experiences with the military. But my second experience was in Buffalo, New York, working with refugees. And they were actually pregnant refugee women, many of them having their first birth in the United States, but some of them were having their subsequent child in the U.S. And my role was to be what's called a mentor. And I helped them to navigate the U.S. healthcare system. So what I did as their mentor would assist them and go along with them to their prenatal appointments. I would help to explain things to them. And so if the provider explained something that they didn't understand, or they were going for a glucose test, we would explain all of that stuff to them. So if you've ever had a child in the U.S., you know how much goes into that. Or if you've ever, given birth, the blood test that they request, the glucose test a lot of providers request, and they measure your belly, and, you may have an ultrasound done. And so there's a lot that goes into it, especially if it's not your culture and your native environment. It might seem really strange. And so as the mentor, I would go along with my mentee to do that, and I would help her to understand things more clearly. And my particular mentee was recommended to have a C-section. And so I had explained to her what that would be like and what that meant. And we had to discuss that with her provider. And it gave me a really good look at what it's like to be someone, to be really vulnerable, to be someone outside of your culture, navigating a really complex system that even for us as Americans seems really complex and hard to navigate, hard to get your questions answered, sometimes it's hard to be acknowledged and taken seriously. And so if English isn't your first language, it's even harder, I can imagine, to get through an experience, especially like this, the child in the story. And so it's just really touching to hear and to really think about what that's like. And
the challenging thing is like, none of us should be prioritizing the safety of people of just our own religion. Whatever religion we are, we should be prioritizing the safety of everyone and their lives. Even if you do believe that there needs to be additional security in the refugee process so that we make sure that terrorists do not get in, I think there also needs to be an understanding that we need to remain an open country for refugees so that they do have a place to go. And most of them are staying in Jordan, in Lebanon, most of the Syrian refugees are staying nearby in Arabic speaking nations and in other countries that have more similar cultures, because that's easier to assimilate. But there are some that for different reasons need to come to the U.S. and we also can help bear that burden that they have.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging subject, but I think the challenge is also in our mindset of not discriminating against people because of their religious beliefs.
Yeah. We don't want fear to overrun, and take over when we make decisions. I think it's definitely important to be cautious, but if fear is the determining factor and fear is what's ruling and guiding the way that we make decisions, that's very dangerous. I think that can really create discrimination and prejudice that is not realistic. That's not, is not well-founded.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been listening to podcasts lately to some extent with Muslim voices and with people of color. There's a lot of different ways that you can hear other people's voices of what they're experiencing and what they're understanding. I feel like part of understanding the world and our country is to listen to those other voices. So I'm trying to put together a list of different podcasts that people can listen to hear some of those different diverse voices. And I will post that on Facebook and on the blog and things when I get that done. But I just throw that out there that if you disagree with us right now or you disagree with whatever, I mean, that's fine. We have to listen to each other and we have to kind of take the time to hear other people's opinions and voices. And I try to make sure that my media sources are really varied so that I'm not just getting what I want to hear, but I'm trying to really understand the true story. Okay, let's move to another topic here. I was really interested in hearing, you have seen the movie Hidden Figures, which I haven't seen yet, and I think I'm going to go see it next weekend with my girlfriends. So tell me about that, and you took your two little girls to go see it with you.
I did. So one of the other ways that I mother, and it's partly because of this situation I'm in life right now, my husband is working a lot. He's gone a lot. I take them to a lot of the things I go to. I am discerning, though. I don't just take them anywhere. Sometimes I have to bow out and say I can't come to something if I think it's not appropriate for them. But if I think it's something that I can teach them and I can share with them in an age-appropriate level, in an age-appropriate way, I do. And so I took them to the Hidden Figures movie. It was, I think, rated PG, and there was some language in it, just a little bit. But, and I don't know if I would have gone at first with that, but I think the overall point of the movie was great, and I loved it. The acting was phenomenal. The videography was wonderful. The women, so the main characters of the movie are the actors Taraji P. Henson, Octavia Spencer, and Janelle Monáe. They played three mathematicians that worked for NASA, but they were working to get the first man on the moon, and I don't remember when that happened. Sorry.
We'll look it up.
60s.
Yeah, it was in the 60s.
And they talk about, the segregation that was happening within the Langley Air Base where they worked, and how these mathematicians were extremely intelligent, but they were not even allowed to drink out of the same coffee cup as the other employees at the center. And so I just thought, wow, and when I got a chance to sit in there with my daughters and they see that, it's a really good way for children to absorb because they can see it all there. They can see it acted out. They can see the nuances. They can see the way someone treats someone else, even non-verbally. And I think that really resonated with my older daughter. She was 3 at the time. And so we were just kind of whispering back and forth. There was one instance specifically where one of the mathematicians was in this room with the other workers, and they didn't have another coffee cup or coffee pot, and she got coffee from that coffee, and they all gave her these really mean looks, and you could tell that she was not wanted. And it was a strong enough feeling that my 3-year-old could see it. And I explained to her, that there was a time where Black people were not allowed to drink out of the same, reservoir or to touch things that white people touched. And when she saw that, and after seeing it on the screen and then me explaining it to her, I could tell she was definitely touched by it. She kissed my hand. And I'm married to a white man and we drink coffee a lot. And so for her, that was a very real thing. We all share everything in this house. And so the movie was really good to just kind of press in and depict a lot of the things that I've shared with her and I've shared with my girls about racism and discrimination and just little things I've explained to them that, people still don't treat people nicely just because the color of their skin, and they were able to see that. And so I loved the movie. I thought it was really, really good. Very well done. And it was cute as well. It was funny. The music was really great. And I definitely think it's age appropriate for a kid probably around 3 or 4 or up.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I'm excited to go see it next weekend. I don't think I'll take my kids at this point because they've never even seen, this is kind of crazy, but they've never even seen a movie.
No, that's not crazy.
At all. They haven't seen any movie. They've only seen videos on Netflix. That's pretty much the extent of it. And I tried to show them Curious George. I think I might have mentioned this on another podcast.
You did.
I tried to show them Curious George and they're scared to death of the elephant. So I can't even, it's just, I don't know what they would do with a movie that's not animated at all. So, they'll get there, we have other ways of teaching those kind of things. But, so one of the things that I got really excited about this last month is that I read the book Homegoing by Yasi, I believe. And it was, first of all, just as a book, it's so well written. It's I read someone else say it's very economical prose. She uses one chapter to describe the life of a character. And then the next chapter is a completely different character. And there's not the same character repeated throughout the book. Every chapter is a different character, which is amazing, but they're all somehow intertwined. And so you're trying to figure out who this character is and how they're related to the person that you just read about and who's their son. And there's this whole family tree that goes through it that is fascinating. And she uses this family tree to tell the story of basically slavery in the Gold Coast and the British involvement, and then with the tribes and the different tribal involvement in selling slaves there, which I really did not even know about. I mean, that whole history is just unfolded for you. And then about halfway through the book, they come to the U.S., one of the characters. And so it goes through slavery in the U.S. and through the whole 20th century until today, basically. So it's hundreds of years of history is shown through this one novel and through this one family tree and lineage. And I think another just amazing thing is I have a really difficult time watching movies also because I'm just highly sensitive to things that I see on the screen. So violence and things like that, and watching movies about slavery and oppression really deeply affect me, which is not a bad thing. It's just sometimes it's difficult for me to get those graphic images out of my mind. And even action movies and stuff like that, I'm I don't even want to see this because I'll just replay it over and over. So, but with a book, I feel I still get a really good picture and understanding of what was happening. And a lot of times it's deeper and more nuanced than I would get even in the movie. So I feel I just had this new understanding of the oppression that took place over time. And the thread that's woven throughout this story is that history plays a huge role in today, and that hundreds of years of oppression is still relevant today. It's still affecting the African American experience in the United States and in Ghana. And just the sorrow that I felt for these characters and what they experienced. I mean, she did a beautiful job of creating an amazing story that was really fascinating, and just you wanted to keep reading because the story was well written and every story was different and interesting. But in addition to that, I feel like it's really important story because of the weight of it, the weight of the understanding that you can have for the experience of people that have been oppressed and how that affects through time the family life of today. It was just really good. So I recommend it.
I have to check it out. I just wrote it down on my list of books for the year.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm trying to find a couple other books to read this month for Black History Month. And I don't even know if this episode is going to be up by the end of February, but I guess I'll try to make it. So I've picked out a couple more that I'm going to be reading. Americana, which I know is one of your favorites. And I'm like halfway through Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Tatum. So I'm halfway through that. So I'm going to finish that. And also I really want to read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard of that.
So Trevor Noah is a late night show host in the US, but he was born in South Africa, I think. And he had a Black mother and a white father. And that was against the law when he was born. So he's born a crime. So he has really amazing insights on race. And he was on Fresh Air not long ago. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And he's just a brilliant guy when it comes to understanding all these social constructs and philosophies and everything. And I mean, he has to be brilliant for some of the comedy that he does as well, because it's really funny and interesting. But so that's another one that I would like to read. What about you? Do you have any other books on your list?
I have a few books. It's called Misunderstood, The Impact of Growing Up Overseas. I put that book on my list. And then I have The Feminine Mystique and The Screwtape Letters. Those are on my list.
Diverse.
Yeah.
The Feminine Mystique and The Screwtape Letters. That's as opposite as you could get.
And I know. I think that just speaks of like the person I want to be. I want to be well read. If I'm going to, have these nuanced views of the world, I think that I have to also kind of know where they come from. And I think I have to be able to articulate myself better if I'm going to be speaking with people who are different than me and people who are a lot like me, because I meet a lot of people who we have similar views, but maybe we don't come from the same background of, why we had those same views. And so I'd like to be able to share about them in a more educated way.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we're about ready to wrap this episode up, but I wanted to hear if you have a favorite thing that you'd like to share with us, something that you're loving.
Okay. Yes. So I have two. I know I've got better ones, but this is what I could come up with and think of right now. So one is Texture. It's an app where you can read pretty much any magazines. I am not a huge magazine buff. I don't read the populars, like those top 10, I'm not into those mags, but I do like magazines like Dwell and what else? I read magazines like Clean Eating, Afar, Domino Magazine. I read Essence Magazine and National Geographic. Like that's a super expensive magazine that I can't typically buy on the regular basis, or Time and stuff like that. And so with Texture, you pay $9.99 a month and you can get access to any magazine, even back issues for like years. And so I really, really like that. And that's good because I can read them at night with the lights off if my husband's already asleep.
You can just read them right there on your phone or on your tablet or something. Oh, cool.
And I love this book called Chinesey. So I have a friend who's going to China this summer, and her husband is really into languages, and they want to teach their sons, and they all want to know how to say some things before they get there. And so there's a book called Chinesey. It's a visual-based learning system which teaches Chinese characters. And it's really, really cool. Like they take the characters, the letters, and they put them against an actual illustrated drawing of the meaning of the word. And it's to help you kind of get this visualization of the term and you can hopefully remember it easier and be able to identify it.
So is it a book, or is there like any kind of like oral type thing that goes along with it?
Well, I just saw the book, but I think you can go to Chinesey.com and they have more resources and stuff there to help you.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if I have a favorite today because I think my favorite was homegoing. So
okay,
that's going to be it for me. Anjelica, tell everyone where they can find you online.
Yep. You can find me at angelicamalone.com, and that's Anjelica with a J. And then you can find me on Instagram at Anjelica Malone. I'm also on Facebook, but I'm not super active on there. But if you go there, you'll be led to my website.
And you can find me at theglobalmomshow.com and on Facebook at The Global Mom Show, on Twitter at The Global Mom, and on Instagram at The Global Mom Show. Now, if you would like to be a part of the private Facebook community for The Global Mom Show, you just need to go to groups/The Global Moms Network in Facebook, and you can ask to join, and we will let you join, and you can come and you can ask questions and talk with other global moms, and it's just a way for us to build some community, and we would love to have you. So if you have questions for me or Anjelica, just hop into one of those places and let us know, and we will try to do another mom chat in the next couple of weeks and answer some of those questions and share a few more of our ideas and thoughts about current events and some of our favorite things. So thanks so much for tuning in today. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.